The leather portfolio in my hands felt heavy, not because of the paper inside, but because of the lies it contained. I stood at the back of the conference room, invisible against the mahogany paneling, watching Marcus charm the room. He wore a suit that cost more than my first car, and a smile that had fooled the board of directors for 5 years. But he wasn't fooling the man at the head of the table. Not yet, anyway. Mr. Henderson sat like a stone statue. He was 70 years old, built the Henderson hotel chain from a single roadside motel, and had eyes that could spot a cracked foundation from a mile away. This was the biggest contract our firm, Miller & Sons Construction, had ever bid on. The renovation of the Grand Henderson in Chicago. A $20 million job. It was the kind of project that secured pensions and kept the lights on for another decade. Marcus tapped the blueprint spread across the table. As you can see, Mr. Henderson, my vision for the atrium involves a cantilevered glass ceiling. It captures the light, maximizes energy efficiency, and frankly, it's going to be the jewel of the city. I spent weeks calculating the load-bearing requirements to ensure we could maintain the historic facade while modernizing the interior. I tightened my grip on my portfolio. Marcus hadn't spent weeks on anything. He had spent weeks on the golf course. I had spent weeks at my drafting table in the basement office, running the math, calling steel suppliers, and figuring out how to keep a 100-year-old building from collapsing under the weight of Marcus's ego. He hadn't even looked at the final plans until 10 minutes ago. Henderson leaned forward, putting on a pair of wire-rimmed glasses. He didn't look at the flashy rendering Marcus was pointing at. He looked at the structural notes in the corner. "This steel truss system," Henderson said, his voice gravelly and low. "It's unusual for a span this wide. Why go with the H-beams instead of a standard I-beam configuration?" Marcus didn't blink. He didn't even hesitate. "Aesthetics, sir. It provides a cleaner line." My stomach turned. It wasn't aesthetics, it was weight distribution. The H-beams were necessary because the existing limestone walls couldn't support the lateral thrust of standard I-beams without expensive reinforcement. If we used I-beams, the walls would buckle within 5 years. Marcus was guessing. He was gambling with millions of dollars and human safety because he couldn't be bothered to read the brief I left on his desk. Henderson frowned. Aesthetics? In a ceiling hidden by acoustic panels? "Well," Marcus chuckled, a nervous sound that grated on my ears. "We pride ourselves on quality, even where you can't see it. It's the Miller way." It was the Miller way when his father ran the company. Since Old Man Miller passed and his nephew Marcus took over, the Miller way had become cutting corners and taking credit. I had worked for this family for 25 years. I started as a laborer, became a foreman, then a project manager, and finally the head of design and logistics. I knew every bolt and screw in our inventory. Marcus knew how to order lunch. "I see," Henderson said. He didn't look convinced. He turned the page of the proposal. "And the HVAC retrofit? This building is a landmark. You can't just punch holes in the exterior for venting. My engineers said it was impossible to upgrade to a Tier 4 cooling system without destroying the brickwork." Marcus froze. I saw the sweat bead on his neck. This was the one part of the project he deemed boring and had refused to discuss in our prep meetings. He had no answer. He didn't even know what a Tier 4 system was. He turned to look at me, his eyes pleading for a lifeline, but his voice was dismissive. "Jack, get the water for Mr. Henderson, will you? And maybe you can pull up the schematics for the vents, though I believe I explained this in the executive summary." He was throwing me the ball, but he expected me to catch it, polish it, and hand it back to him so he could score. For years, I had done exactly that. I did it for the sake of the crew, for the guys in the yard who needed the work, for the memory of the old man. But watching him lie about the steel beams had triggered something. I walked to the table. I didn't get the water. I placed my hand on the blueprints right over Marcus's manicured fingers. "The Tier 4 system works because we aren't venting through the brick," I said, looking directly at Henderson. "We're utilizing the old coal chutes in the sub-basement. They run vertically through the core of the building. We line them with high-velocity ductwork, vent through the roof, and leave the facade untouched. It saves you 3 months of masonry work and $500,000 in restoration costs." Henderson's eyebrows shot up. He looked from me to Marcus, then back to me. "The coal chutes? Are they wide enough?" 36 inches square, I answered immediately. "We need 32 for the ducting. It's a tight fit, but but I verified the measurements with a laser survey last Tuesday. It fits. Last Tuesday? Henderson asked. I thought you were in a strategy meeting with my team last Tuesday, Marcus. Marcus flushed red. Well, Jack handles the grunt work. I direct the vision. It's a brilliant solution, Henderson muttered, tracing the line on the paper. My people didn't catch that. That's because your people were looking at the 1980 renovations, I said. I went back to the original 1920 blueprints. The chutes were boarded up during the gas conversion in '55. Jack, Marcus snapped, his voice sharp. That's enough. Thank you for the technical sidebar. Why don't you wait in the hall? We need to discuss financials. He was doing it again. He was dismissing me like a child after I had just saved his presentation. I looked at Marcus. I saw the arrogance, the fear, and the absolute lack of respect. I thought about the late nights. I thought about the missed anniversary dinners because the project had to be perfect. I thought about the bonus he promised me 3 years ago that never materialized while he bought a new Porsche. No, I said. The room went silent. The air conditioner hum was suddenly deafening. Marcus laughed, a short, sharp bark. Excuse me? I said no, I'm not going to the hall, and we aren't discussing financials because you don't know the financials, Marcus. You think the margin on this job is 20%. It's 12. If you bid what you plan to bid, the company will go bankrupt before we finish the second floor. Marcus stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. You are out of line, Jack. Get out. You're fired. You can't fire me, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. Because I quit. I turned to Henderson. The H-beams are for the lateral load. The coal chutes are the only way to save the masonry. And the timeline Marcus gave you is a fantasy. It takes 6 weeks to cure concrete in this weather, not 2. If you pour in November like he suggests, you'll have cracks by January. Jack, get out! Marcus screamed, losing all composure. I looked at Henderson one last time. Good luck with your hotel, sir. It's a beautiful building. It deserves a builder who knows the difference between a load-bearing wall and a partition. I turned and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I closed it firmly, hearing Marcus's frantic voice trying to spin the situation as the latch clicked. The walk to the elevator felt like walking underwater. My legs were heavy. I pressed the button and stared at my reflection in the polished brass doors. A 50-year-old man in a suit from a department store, with no job, a mortgage, and a daughter in college. What had I just done? I didn't go back to my office to pack. I didn't want to see the stack of files that represented years of my life. I walked straight to the parking garage, got into my 10-year-old truck, and drove. I drove for an hour without a destination. I ended up at a diner near the shipyard, a place where the coffee tasted like battery acid and nobody cared who you were. I sat there for 2 hours, staring at a cold cup of joe. My phone was in my pocket, buzzing every 5 minutes. I ignored it. I knew it was Marcus leaving threatening voicemails or the HR director trying to figure out paperwork. I finally went home around 6. The house was quiet. My wife Sarah was in the kitchen. She looked up when I walked in, expecting the usual tired nod. Instead, she saw my face. Jack, what happened? You're home early. I sat down at the kitchen table and put my hands on the wood. I had built this table. White oak, mortise, and tenon joints. Solid. I quit, Sarah. I walked out in the middle of the Henderson pitch. She stopped cutting the vegetables. She wiped her hands on a towel and sat across from me. She didn't panic. She didn't scream about the bills. She just took my hand. Did he deserve it? Yes, I said. He fired me technically, but I quit first. Good, she said. You should have done it 5 years ago. We have savings, I said, trying to convince myself more than her. I can consult, maybe pick up some residential work. We'll figure it out, she said. You're the best builder in the state, Jack. Someone will hire you. We ate dinner in relative silence. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving a cold dread in my gut. I had burned a bridge with the biggest construction firm in the county. Marcus was petty. He would badmouth me to every supplier and contractor in the tri-state area. I might not be able to buy a box of nails in this town again. At 8 o'clock, the phone rang. The landline. Nobody called the landline except telemarketers and my mother. I let it ring 3 times. Sarah looked at me. You going to get that? I sighed and walked to the wall unit. I picked up the receiver. Hello? Jack? This is Robert Henderson. I froze. My grip on the phone tightened. Mr. Henderson, how did you get this number? I have a very capable assistant. Look, I'm going to make this short. I walked out of that meeting 10 minutes after you did. I felt a jolt of shock. You did? Marcus is a fool, Henderson said. His voice was crisp, authoritative. He spent 10 minutes trying to tell me you were unstable, that you were drinking, that you stole the plans. But he couldn't answer my question about the elevator shafts. He didn't know the load capacity. The shafts are reinforced concrete, I said automatically. They can take the weight of the new freight cars, but you need to upgrade the counterweights. Exactly, Henderson said. Jack, I don't do business with liars, and I don't build hotels on bad foundations. I fired Miller & Sons. I pulled the contract. I'm sorry to hear that, sir. It would have been a good project for the crew. It's still going to be a good project, Henderson said, but not for Marcus. I want you. I blinked, looking at Sarah. She was watching me intently. Sir, I'm a one-man operation as of 4 hours ago. I don't have the insurance, the crew, or the capital to bond a $20 million job. I know, Henderson said. I'm not asking you to be the general contractor. I'm hiring a different firm for the labor, Johnson & Wright. You know them? I know them. They're honest. Good work. I'm hiring them on the condition that you are the project executive. You run the job, you approve the materials, you sign off on the milestones. You answer directly to me. They swing the hammers, you call the shots. I leaned against the wall. Project executive? I'm offering you a 3-year contract. Double whatever Marcus was paying you, plus a completion bonus. And I want you to fix the mess Marcus made of the preliminary budget. Mr. Henderson, I don't know what to say. Say yes, Jack. I need a builder, not a salesman. Can you be at my office tomorrow at 9? I'll be there, I said. Good. And Jack? Bring your own blueprints. The ones Marcus had were missing half the electrical grid. I know, I said. I kept the real ones at home. See you tomorrow. I hung up the phone. Sarah was standing right in front of me. Well? Henderson fired Miller & Sons, I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. He wants me to run the project. He's hiring me directly. Sarah smiled, and then she hugged me. It wasn't a celebratory hug. It was a relief hug, a validation. The next morning, I drove to the Henderson Corporation headquarters. It was a glass tower downtown, a world away from the dusty trailer offices I was used to. The receptionist expected me. She led me to the top floor. When I walked into the boardroom, it wasn't just Henderson. Sitting at the far end of the table was Marcus. Marcus looked terrible. His tie was loose, his eyes were bloodshot. He looked like a man who had been up all night trying to save a sinking ship. When he saw me, his jaw tightened. What is he doing here? Marcus hissed, standing up. Robert, this is the disgruntled employee I told you about. You can't seriously be listening to him. Henderson didn't even look at Marcus. He looked at me. Good morning, Jack. Have a seat. I sat down. Not in the back corner. I sat 3 chairs down from Henderson, directly across from Marcus. Marcus, Henderson said, his voice calm and cold. I invited you here as a courtesy. You have legal threats regarding the intellectual property of the designs for my hotel. That's right, Marcus said, puffing out his chest. Those plans belong to Miller & Sons. If you use them with another contractor, we will sue. Jack developed them on company time. Henderson slid a folder across the table toward Marcus. I had my legal team look into that. It turns out the intellectual property clause in your employment contracts is quite specific. It assigns ownership to the company for work created at the direction of management. Jack, did Marcus direct you to design the coal chute ventilation system? I looked at Marcus. No. Marcus told me specifically to stop wasting time on old junk and focus on the lobby atrium. And the structural reinforcement for the H-beams, Henderson asked. Marcus told me to use standard I-beams because they were cheaper. I did the calculations for the H-beams on my own time, at home, on weekends, because I didn't want the building to fall down. Henderson looked at Marcus. It seems Jack did the work despite your direction, not because of it. Furthermore, I have an affidavit here from your former foreman, who claims you ordered him to use subpar concrete on the Riverside project last year, a project I also own. Marcus went pale. That's a lie. Who told you that? People talk, Marcus, Henderson said, especially when they realize the ship is sinking. Now, here is the situation. You were going to sign a release for all designs related to the Grand Henderson. You were going to waive any non-compete clauses for Jack, and in exchange, I won't report your negligence on the Riverside project to the state licensing board. The silence in the room was absolute. Marcus looked at the paper, then at Henderson, and finally at me. He looked for a moment like he wanted to fight. He wanted to scream and bluster like he always did, but he was out of his depth. He wasn't bullying a subcontractor over a $1,000 invoice anymore. He was facing a billionaire who could end his career with a phone call. Marcus picked up the pen. His hand shook. He signed the document. "Get out," Henderson said. Marcus stood up. He gathered his briefcase. He stopped fast beside me. He leaned down, whispering so only I could hear. "You think you won? You're nothing without the Miller name. You're just a glorified carpenter." I looked him in the eye. For the first time in 5 years, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. "I am a carpenter, Marcus. That's why I know how to build things. You only know how to sell what other people build." Marcus stormed out. The door clicked shut. Henderson picked up the signed release and handed it to his assistant. Then he turned to me. "Now that the garbage is taken out, let's look at these electrical grids. I have a concern about the load on the third floor server room." I opened my portfolio. I pulled out the real blueprints, the ones with the coffee stains, the eraser marks, and the correct math. "I thought you might ask about that," I said. "I upsized the conduit to run a dedicated line. We have plenty of power." We worked for 4 hours. We didn't talk about feelings. We didn't talk about justice. We talked about amps, voltage, static loads, and shear strength. It was the best meeting of my life. 2 weeks later, I was on site at the Grand Henderson. The demolition crew was clearing out the lobby. I was wearing a hard hat and holding a roll of drawings, standing in the center of the debris. A truck pulled up outside. It was a delivery of steel. I walked out to the loading dock to check the manifest. The driver hopped out. It was one of the guys from Miller & Sons, a guy I had known for 10 years. He looked at me, surprised. "Jack? I heard you got fired. I heard Marcus ran you out of town." "Not exactly," I said, signing the clipboard. "I'm running the job, Mike." Mike looked at the building, then back at me. He grinned. "No kidding. So, these H-beams, they're actually the right size this time?" "They're the right size," I said. "Thank God," Mike said. "Marcus tried to tell us to use the cheap stuff on the warehouse job last week. The whole crew walked off. He's losing contracts left and right. I think the bank is calling in his loans." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. Not for Marcus, but for the company the old man built. But things rot from the head down. You can't fix a bad foundation with a coat of paint. "Anyway," Mike said, climbing back into the cab. "Good to see you, Jack. It's good to have someone in charge who knows which end of the hammer to hold." "Drive safe, Mike," I said. I walked back into the hotel. The air was filled with dust and the sound of jackhammers. It was loud, dirty, and chaotic. To anyone else, it was just a construction site. But to me, it was a symphony. I climbed the temporary stairs to the second floor, looking up at the ceiling where the atrium would be. I could see it in my head. The steel truss, the glass, the light pouring in. It was going to work. Not because of a sales pitch, but because the math was right. Mr. Henderson walked in a moment later, wearing a pristine white hard hat. He stood beside me, looking up at the exposed beams. "The coal chutes?" he asked. "Clear," I said. "Ductwork goes in on Monday." "Good," he said. He tapped the wall with his cane. "You know, Jack, I've been thinking about my property in Miami. It needs a complete overhaul. The salt air is eating the rebar." "Stainless steel reinforcement," I said without looking at him. "And you need to use a crystalline waterproofing admixture in the concrete. It seals the capillaries." Henderson chuckled. "You're hired for that one too. Don't get too comfortable in Chicago." He walked away to inspect the flooring. I stayed there for a minute longer. I took a deep breath, smelling the drywall dust and the old timber. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Sarah. "Dinner at 7? I bought steaks." I typed back, "I'll be there," and put a bottle of wine in the fridge. The good stuff. I put the phone away and unrolled the blueprints on a sawhorse. I took out my pencil. There was work to do. Real work. and for the first time in a long time, my name was on it.